Hi, and welcome to Reasoning Together. The purpose of our channel is to equip Christians to understand what we believe and why we believe it, and ultimately to help us to grow and mature in our faith to bear fruit. So today is the second part in our series on the evidence of God. Last time we talked about the origin of matter. Today we'll talk about, is there evidence of design in the creation? And basically it comes down to this: does the evidence around us lead us to believe that things happen naturally, meaning no intelligent source? So does the evidence around us lead us to believe that things were intelligently designed, meaning there's a God? So there's a number of ways of doing that, and we'll look at a few today. The first one is complexity and information. Let's say you're walking on a beach and you see written in the sand, "Hello, my name is George." We would all intuitively know that that came from a person. First of all, because of the complexity. There's no amount of time that randomness would produce the message, "Hello, my name is George." But in addition to that, it's delivering information. And there's a law in the information sciences that says that information can only come from a mind. And if you think about that, that makes sense. Any book you've ever read, any movie you've ever seen, any program that you've ever run on your computer or cell phone, the original idea for any of that came from somebody's mind. Now, information is knowledge or instruction, and the process of transferring that information from one mind to another, or from one mind to a thing like a computer, is the communication process. Now, how that works is there's information in a mind, there's a desire to communicate it, but then there has to be an understanding of the language or the protocol that the target audience understands, right? So, for example, if I'm going to be speaking to someone in English, I would choose the English protocol to deliver my message. So I've got 26 letters in the English alphabet. I've got, lots of words in the English vocabulary. I've got sentence structure and punctuation. So if I properly use the English protocol, I can most effectively deliver that message. So that is an intelligent idea. Now, in addition to that, errors do occur in the communication process. And a method to deal with errors is something called error detection and correction. And it's a method of finding an error and then correcting it, right, to the most likely thing that it should be, right? So say, for example, somebody's speaking to you and they say, "I have a pet. My dog's name is Fido. He has 4 legs and he likes to bark." Well, we would intuitively switch the word dog for dog because we can, based on the context, we can determine that it's more likely that he meant to say dog versus doc. And that's a method of error detection and correction. And there's many ways of doing error detection and correction. So what do we have? So we have information, which must come from a mind. You've got protocol selection, which is a decision, once again, an intelligent thing. And then you've got error detection and correction. Once again, it's an intelligent thing. You've got to understand what's correct and what's incorrect in order to do error detection and correction. The reality is, if any system that you see has any one of these three, the system was intelligently designed. So why do I say that? Do we see this in nature around us? Well, it turns out in the cell of every living thing, whether it be a plant or an animal, person, whatever, is this thing called DNA, which you've probably heard of. And DNA is the complete instruction manual on how to build, run, and maintain the thing that it's in. So, for example, in every cell of my body is my complete DNA, which is the instructions on how to build, run, and maintain me. So I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but how does your body know to put your hair here? How does your body know how to regulate your body to body temperature to 98.6 or 8 or whatever it is? How does your body know what to do when it gets a cut? Well, all of this is information that resides in the DNA. And once again, information can only come from a mind. But information by itself is useless unless you can do something with it. Well, it turns out the DNA is in a protocol that can be used. In the cell is something called a ribosome, and a ribosome is the most basic building machine in any living thing. And what a ribosome does is it reads a segment of the DNA and it builds proteins, and proteins put together build cells, and cells put together build ultimately people or things, right? So the ribosome, it senses molecules. So the DNA, its protocol is, instead of 26 letters, it's 4 letters. And these are 4 molecules: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. These are the 4 letters that make up the DNA alphabet, if you will. And various combinations of that give the different commands on how to build everything in your body. So there's a copy of a segment of the DNA that is made, and then the ribosome attaches to it, and actually looking for a 3-letter sequence that says start to build. and then it grabs an amino acid that corresponds to every 3-letter combination that it reads, and it builds this protein until eventually it reads a stop building command, and then it releases it to be combined with other proteins that eventually make cells, right? So there's protocol adherence in the body. Now, there are trillions of cells in our body, and this whole process of reading DNA is always happening. The ribosomes are reading trillions and trillions of molecules all the time, right? So errors undoubtedly occur, right? So a ribosome, maybe it doesn't attach properly, or maybe it doesn't read something properly, or maybe there's actually an error in the DNA. So there's error detection and correction in the cell, right? So in those cases where the errors are found, it has got designed into it the capability of detecting and correcting these errors. So any one of these three in a system tells us that the system is intelligently designed. In this case, all three are found in the cell of every living thing. So you've got information which must come from a mind. You've got a protocol that the information is put in that the ribosome can actually understand. And then you've got error detection and correction. So any one of those three tells you that the system was intelligently designed, and the cell has all three. So clearly, we were designed. It's conclusive. What's the opposing view? Well, the opposing view is evolution, which we've all grown up with. And this was an idea that was popularized by Charles Darwin in the mid-1800s. And it basically says from the first self-replicating cell, through mutations, all living species evolve. All plant life, all animals, everything evolved from that first self-replicating cell. So if evolution was correct, we should be able to validate it from a theoretical level. It should make sense. And we should be able to validate it from an observational level. We should see evidence that it happened all around us. So does it make sense from a theoretical level? Well, first of all, the general understanding of the self-replicating cell was very basic in the mid-1800s. The general understanding was they just thought it was a blob. They had no idea of the DNA, which is information. They had no idea of the protocol adherence, and they had no idea of the error detection and correction, right? So they had no idea that there was these key components of this that can only happen by an intelligent designer. But let's give a little bit more thought to that. So is it possible that randomness could produce a manufacturing plant? So this is basically what a cell is. It's a manufacturing plant that manufactures a copy of itself, right? So whether it be at a microscopic level or at our level, can randomness ever produce a manufacturing plant? So let's just think about that. So first of all, has any one of us ever walked by any kind of a plant, a manufacturing plant, and said, hey, look what randomness in nature has created? No, we all intuitively know that it was built by people. But in addition to that, let's sort of take a look at that a little bit deeper. Say you've got, the wind blowing raw materials, and you got lightning striking, and you got billions and billions of years. How long would it take for randomness to build a building? And in that building would be doors. And somehow raw material would be transported to this building and brought into the building. And then there somehow is a mechanism to determine if the raw material is correct or not. If it's wrong, it rejects it. If it's brought in, then it builds things based on information that's in the building. So how much randomness and how much time would it take for that to happen? Well, we all intuitively know that it can't, right? Based on everything else, we all know that would never happen. Now, beyond that, right, the idea says that from mutations, all living species evolved, right? Well, can that happen? Well, we know that the cell has error detection and correction already built in. So any error that it sees, it's able to detect and correct. But there are errors that are so severe that it cannot correct it. And we see those on a fairly regular basis. Those are called birth defects. They either cause things to not be born at all, or be born with a very limited life or limited functionality. Every case of mutation that we observe is a limitation in functionality, if not an elimination of sustainable life at all. So from a theoretical level, evolution can't happen. Now, what do we observe? Well, part of the theory is that men evolved from apes. So how many differences, how many transitional steps would there be between apes and men? Are there 5 differences? Are there 100? Are there 1,000? Well, there's literally millions of differences between apes and men from a molecular level, right? And each one of those differences would be a transitional step from apes until men. So how many transitional steps would that be? Well, that would be millions. So the fossil record should be riddled with evidence of transitional species. As a matter of fact, that's what Charles Darwin himself said. If my theory is correct, I would expect that we would find all sorts of evidence in the fossil record. But what have we found? We found none. Now, occasionally you'll hear of somebody finding a bone fragment or a skull and attributing it to a missing link, but in every case, it's been proven to be a bone fragment of some other animal or a skull of maybe a deformed person or some other animal. The fossil record should literally just be absolutely full of all of these transitional species, and we don't see any. If every transitional species was more fit to survive than the previous, we should see living today all sorts of transitional species. But what do we actually see? We see apes and we see men, just as the Bible said. We see nothing in between. As we would have anticipated, based on the fact that theoretically evolution can't happen, observationally there's no evidence that it did. So clearly everything is designed and evolution can't happen and didn't happen. Now this is meant to strengthen your faith. My hope is that you won't get distracted or discouraged when you hear really smart people having compelling explanations of how evolution is true and how it happened, and that there is no God. Because the reality is, that's all worldview driven. And unfortunately, in this topic, worldview tends to trump logic. My hope is that you can rest assured that all evidence point to there has to be a creator. That's the only logical conclusion. Now that we've established, though, that the most logical conclusion is there has to be a creator, who is it? Who is it? Is it the God of the Bible? Is it Allah? Is it Buddha? Is it one of the many gods of Hinduism? And we'll address that next time. And what you'll see is the only logical conclusion is that God is the God of the Bible. So don't fear working out your faith. God actually calls us to seek Him in many ways, including this. So work out your faith. It's very logical. If indeed the God of the Bible is the one true God, we should see evidence of His handiwork all over the place. And we do. So be blessed. Next time we'll talk about who is God. Take care.